Now, the Great Pyramid of Giza is probably the most stunning of all these ancient structures. And the stones are immense, and some of them were cut from a quarry that's hundreds of miles away.
What if everything you've been told about who built the pyramids is wrong? For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood as one of the greatest mysteries on Earth. But recently, we asked Grok AI a simple question. Who really built the pyramids? And the answer? Let's just say, it wasn't the response we expected. Grok analyzed the evidence, ancient records, construction theories, and some of the biggest mysteries surrounding Giza. And what it came up with raised some serious questions. Were the pyramids really built by skilled ancient Egyptian workers? Is there evidence that supports or challenges the popular theories? Or have centuries of myths blurred what the historical evidence actually tells us? Stay with us until the very end, because Grok's final conclusion might surprise you. And before we reveal its answer, take just 1 second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now, let's see what Grok had to say. In 2024, an artificial intelligence was asked a simple question. Who built the pyramids? Not the polite answer. Not the textbook answer everyone already knows. The system was given something no human researcher has ever truly had. Every measurement, every survey, every geological scan, every astronomical alignment, every engineering tolerance ever recorded about the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It was handed all of it at once with one instruction. Analyze this without loyalty to any existing theory. Report only what the numbers actually say. And the answer it gave was not the one anyone expected. It was not a name. It was not a date. It was something stranger and quieter and far more unsettling than a name could ever be. Because what the machine did, layer by layer, was take the explanation we have all been taught since childhood and slowly, methodically take it apart. Sit with that for a moment before we go any further. We are not talking about a fringe theorist with a website. We are talking about a system with no career to protect, no tenure to lose, no reputation riding on the outcome, no professor who might frown at the conclusion. A system that does not care whether the answer is comfortable. And when that system looked at the most studied monument in human history, it did not confirm what we believe. It found something it could not reconcile with what we have been told. To understand why that matters, you first have to understand the story we have all accepted. And you have to hear it fairly, because the official explanation is not stupid. It is not a fairy tale invented by lazy historians. It is a careful, evidence-based account built by serious people over more than a century of work, and it deserves to be stated plainly before anyone tears at it. The standard account goes like this. Around 2560 BCE, during the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, the pharaoh Khufu ordered the construction of a tomb. Over roughly 20 years, tens of thousands of workers, not slaves as the movies imagine, but organized crews of skilled laborers, quarried limestone from the plateau itself, floated finer stone down the Nile, dragged the blocks on wooden sledges across wetted sand, and raised them into place using ramps, levers, ropes, and an enormous disciplined supply of human muscle. Their tools were copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden mallets. Their measuring instruments were knotted cords, plumb lines, wooden squares, and shallow trenches filled with water to find a level surface. And the evidence for this is real. It is not imaginary. Archaeologists have uncovered the worker villages on the Giza Plateau, the bakeries, the breweries, the barracks, the cattle bones, the medical care given to injured laborers whose healed fractures show they were valued enough to mend. There are administrative records written in ink on papyrus describing the daily logistics of moving stone. There are quarry marks, tool marks, the names of work gangs painted in red ochre on hidden blocks deep inside the structure, crews who called themselves things like the Friends of Khufu. There is, in short, a mountain of human fingerprints all over this monument. The people who built it were proud of it. They left their signatures. So, when you hear the claim that the pyramids are mysterious, understand that mainstream archaeology has a serious, coherent answer, and it is supported by physical evidence in the sand. That answer is not a cover-up. It is the best reconstruction-trained experts have been able to assemble. And for most of the pyramid, for the broad question of who organized the labor and why, it holds together remarkably well. But there's one problem with that explanation. And it's not a problem that shrinks the closer you look. It grows. The deeper you examine it, the more unsettling it becomes. Because the story explains the labor. It explains the planning, the workforce, the food, the organization, the motivation, even the names painted in red. But what it has always struggled to explain, what it still cannot fully explain, is the precision. The story tells us who hauled the stones, but it never fully explains how those stones were cut, shaped, leveled, and aligned with a level of accuracy that, in several measurable ways, comes remarkably close to the limits of what we can accomplish today using lasers, diamond saws, satellite positioning, and every advantage that 4,500 years of added knowledge has given us. That is the flaw the machine focused on. Not the question of strength, the question of precision. Because strength is inexpensive, and time is patient. Give 100,000 people enough rope and enough years, and they can drag almost anything across the sand. But precision is different. Precision is not created through effort alone. You cannot force your way to a fraction of a millimeter. You cannot sweat your way into an alignment more accurate than what a modern surveyor can produce. Precision is knowledge. Precision preserves what the builders truly understood. And it is inside that precision, not the size, not the weight, not the labor, that the numbers begin to behave in ways they shouldn't. When the system began its analysis, it didn't begin with theories about lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, or the stories whispered across the internet late at night. It started where every honest investigation should begin, with the floor, with the foundation, with the most ordinary measurement an engineer can make. Is the structure level? Is the ground beneath it truly flat? And the instant the machine examined that one simple, unremarkable number, the comfortable version of history began, almost silently, to fall apart. Because the base of the Great Pyramid is not simply level, it is not merely close to flat. Across a foundation stretching more than 230 meters on each side, a platform large enough to fit several football fields, the entire base stays level within just over 2 centimeters. Only 2 centimeters of difference across the length of 2.5 football fields. That works out to a flatness of roughly 9/1,000ths of 1%. And once you truly understand what that number means, once you picture what it would take to achieve it, using only copper, water, and wood, the foundation of this story becomes the exact place where it stops feeling like history and starts feeling like a message. Let the machine pause on that figure for a moment, because the human mind is not naturally built to grasp how astonishing it really is. 2 centimeters across 230 meters. To picture it more clearly, imagine a sheet of glass covering an entire city block. Across that massive surface, the highest point and the lowest point differ by less than the width of 2 of your fingers. Now, imagine that glass isn't one solid sheet, but millions of separate stone blocks, some as heavy as a small truck, each one cut, adjusted, and placed entirely by hand. And imagine doing all of it without a single tool we would call a precision instrument today. No laser level, no optical transit, no surveyor's theodolite, only water in a trench, a wooden square, a plumb line, and the human eye. The system was given a deliberately simple question. Not who built it, not why. Just this. Based on the tools the official record says they had, a stretched cord, a water level, and a wooden square, what are the chances that a crew could achieve this level of flatness across such a massive distance and keep it consistent on every side? The machine did not respond with a story. It responded with a number, and that number was not good news for the textbook explanation. It judged the result to be statistically improbable. Not impossible, it carefully pointed out, but highly unlikely. The kind of outcome you would expect to fail far more often than succeed. The kind of precision that should begin to drift the moment workers grow tired, the moment the sun warms the water, or the instant a measuring cord stretches ever so slightly in the desert heat. And here is the detail that makes it even more significant. Modern construction does not even require this level of accuracy. We simply do not build to this standard because there is no practical need. When engineers pour the foundation for a skyscraper today, the accepted tolerance across a large concrete slab is far more forgiving than what we see at Giza. A few centimeters of slope across an entire building is completely acceptable. The structure stands, the elevators work, and no one notices. By the standards we actually build to today, the Great Pyramid's foundation is roughly 10 times more precise than it ever needed to be. Think about that. The builders did not just meet an impressive standard, they surpassed the level of accuracy modern engineering considers more than enough for a structure that, according to history, was built as nothing more than a tomb. Why? That is the question the foundation quietly begins to ask. And it is a question that will stay with us through everything that follows. Because precision comes at a cost. Every tiny increase in accuracy demands more time, greater skill, repeated measurements, more discarded stone, and countless extra hours spent perfecting something that appears to serve no practical purpose. A tomb does not require a foundation level to within 0.009%. The dead are not concerned with whether the floor has the slightest slope. So, if the precision was not necessary for function, only two possibilities remain. Either it happened by accident, an unexpected result of construction methods so advanced that this level of accuracy came naturally, or it was intentional. Either the builders simply could not avoid being this precise, or they were trying to communicate something through it. The system did not decide between those possibilities. It simply marked the anomaly, recorded it, and continued, the way any careful investigator notes a detail that does not belong and refuses to ignore it. Then, the moment it shifted its attention away from the ground and examined the pyramid's orientation, the way the entire structure rests in the desert and the exact direction it faces, the second number appeared. And if anything, the second number was even more unsettling than the first. Because the Great Pyramid is not only perfectly level, it is deliberately aligned. Its four sides do not point roughly toward the cardinal directions. They face true north, true south, true east, and true west. And they do so with a level of accuracy that even today is difficult to describe without speaking a little more quietly. The deviation from true north is only about 3 arc minutes. 3 arc minutes. 1 arc minute is just 1/60th of a single degree. The entire horizon around you covers 360 degrees, 21,600 arc minutes. And across that enormous circle, the builders of this monument missed perfect north by only about 3 of them. The error is so incredibly small that you cannot see it, you cannot feel it, and without precise instruments, you would never even know it exists. Now understand what true north actually means, because this is where the story becomes even stranger. True north is not the direction your compass points. A compass follows the magnetic pole, and the magnetic pole moves. It drifts, it wanders, it never stays fixed. True north is geographic north, the exact axis around which the entire Earth rotates. There is no mountain marking it, no stone pointing the way. To find it, you must read the night sky. You must watch the stars slowly circle overhead until you identify the silent point around which they all revolve, the fixed center of the heavens. Then you must transfer that invisible point from the sky onto a straight line drawn in the sand. And finally, you must keep that line perfectly true across 230 meters of construction, without letting it drift even the slightest amount. The system noticed this immediately. This is not the kind of accuracy a civilization discovers by chance. It is the kind of precision we achieve today, using survey-grade instruments, satellite positioning, and carefully calibrated equipment that would not exist for another 4,500 years. Then the machine asked a question the textbook rarely asks. Why would anyone even need this? A tomb does not have to face the true north. A temple does not. A monument celebrating a king does not require an alignment more accurate than what a modern surveyor would produce. An alignment so exact that the people standing before it could never notice, and no ceremony could ever depend on it. The precision goes far beyond the purpose. It exceeds every practical explanation we can offer. And when accuracy surpasses necessity by such a wide margin, an investigator is left with an uncomfortable possibility: that the accuracy itself was the purpose, that the alignment was never just a method to reach another goal, it was the goal, that someone standing on this plateau thousands of years ago went to extraordinary lengths to aim this mountain of stone toward the unchanging center of the sky, knowing almost no one would ever recognize what they had done, except perhaps someone intelligent enough, thousands of years later, to measure it and ask the one question that truly matters. The machine asked that question, and the next number it uncovered began to answer it. That number was hidden inside a ratio so simple a child could sketch it, yet so unusual in this setting that mathematicians have debated it for more than 2 centuries. Measure the entire perimeter of the pyramid's base, walk all 4 sides, and add the total distance around. Then compare it to the pyramid's original height before time stripped away its capstone. Divide the first number by the second. The result is not a neat whole number. It is not something you would deliberately design unless you understood exactly what you were doing. It comes out to approximately 2 pi, 2 times the endless irrational number that defines the relationship between a circle and its diameter, the number that begins 3.1415 and continues forever without repeating or ending. The perimeter of the base relates to the height in almost the same way that the circumference of a circle relates to its radius. The pyramid, a structure made entirely of flat surfaces, sharp edges, triangles, and squares, contains the geometry of a perfect circle hidden within its proportions. And the match is not approximate. It is not within 5%, or even within 1%. The machine calculated the difference at only 0.05 of 1%. Now, the textbook does have an explanation for this. It is a reasonable explanation, and the system considered it carefully before moving on. The conventional view argues that the relationship is simply a coincidence of measurement. The traditional explanation says the Egyptians measured horizontal distances by rolling a wooden drum or cylinder and counting how many times it turned, while vertical distances were measured by stacking cubits. Measure the ground with a rolling wheel and the height with fixed units, and pi quietly slips into your calculations without anyone ever knowing its name. The wheel performs the geometry for you, You end up with the circle, even if you never truly understand the mathematics behind it. It is a neat explanation. It is simple. And if there were only one example, it would make perfect sense. But the machine was not studying a single measurement. It was examining the entire structure, every dimension available from modern surveys. And it discovered that the relationship was not an isolated coincidence hiding in one calculation. It appeared again and again in completely separate parts of the geometry, in proportions that had nothing to do with one another, relationships that could not all be explained by the same rolling drum. So the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It calculated the probability. It asked how likely it was for this precise ratio to appear by accident in multiple unrelated parts of the design. And the answer it returned was difficult to ignore. It was the kind of result that, in almost any other field, would force you to stop calling it coincidence and begin calling it something else: intention. Because coincidence does not keep repeating on demand. Coincidence does not appear everywhere you choose to look. When the same fingerprint keeps showing up in places that have no obvious connection, you are no longer looking at chance. You are looking at a deliberate choice. Then the machine uncovered another fingerprint, older and even stranger than the first. At least pi had a place in the ancient world, even if the Egyptians never wrote it down. This next number did not. It is the ratio we call phi, the golden ratio, 1.618 and continuing forever. It is the proportion the human eye naturally finds beautiful without understanding why. It appears in the spiral of a seashell, the branching of trees, and the arrangement of seeds inside a flower. As far as the written record shows, no one formally described this number until the Greek geometers recorded it. And that happened more than 2,000 years after the final casing stone was placed on the Great Pyramid. 2,000 years, roughly the same span of time that separates us from the Roman Empire. According to everything we can verify, the golden ratio was not a recognized mathematical idea when this monument was built. It would not officially enter history for another 20 centuries. Yet the machine found it here, not just once. It found phi in the relationship between the pyramid's height and its base. It found it in the slope of the faces, in the angle where the massive triangular sides rise toward the sky. It found it within the proportions of the internal geometry, in measurements the builders could never have produced simply by rolling a drum, because rolling a drum can introduce pi, but it cannot create phi. Phi is something entirely different. It follows a different mathematical path, a number you cannot simply stumble across the way you might discover the geometry of a circle. The system counted every place where it appeared, and the result was striking. At least 7. 7 independent dimensional relationships. 7 separate places where a proportion that would not be written down for another 2,000 years was already embedded in the stone. As though the builders not only understood it, but believed it was so important that they wove it into the very framework of the entire monument. And this is where an investigator's uneasiness turns into something far more serious. Because you can argue, if you're willing to stretch the explanation, that pi found its way into the design through a measuring wheel. But you cannot make that same argument for phi. There is no wheel to roll, no stick to stack, no simple method that accidentally sneaks the golden ratio into your calculations. Phi cannot appear by chance. It has to be recognized, understood, calculated, and deliberately built into the design. Finding it in one measurement might be the kind of coincidence a generous skeptic could accept. Finding it in 7 different places, woven through the height, the slopes, and the internal chambers, is not the kind of coincidence a skeptic can dismiss. It is a signature. It is someone leaving their handwriting in stone, written in a mathematical language that would not officially exist for another 2,000 years. The machine paused on that thought. It placed the two numbers side by side, pi, the hidden circle inside the square, and phi, the proportion that should not have existed yet, and noticed what they shared. Both are irrational numbers. Both continue forever. Both represent deep mathematical truths that civilizations usually reach only after generations of careful study, the kind of knowledge that sits near the highest level of a culture's understanding of the universe. And yet, both were already here, built into one of the oldest monuments on Earth, at the very beginning, when conventional history tells us the builders were using copper chisels and dragging massive stones on wooden sleds. Mathematics was not slowly developing. It already appeared complete. It already looked fully formed. As the system considered that possibility, it asked its next question in the only direction the evidence seemed to point: outward, beyond the pyramid itself, toward the planet beneath it. The next step was surprisingly simple. The machine took the pyramid's own dimensions and multiplied them by a single number, and what came back brought the analysis to an abrupt stop. It took the original height, before the outer casing disappeared and the capstone was lost, and multiplied it by 43,200. The result matched, within a margin far too small to dismiss easily, the Earth's polar radius, the distance from the planet's center to either pole. Then it measured the full perimeter of the pyramid's base, all four sides added together, multiplied that by the very same number, 43,200, and the result closely matched the Earth's equatorial circumference. The same multiplier, two different measurements of the pyramid, two different measurements of the Earth, and one identical number connecting them all. As though the pyramid was never intended to be only a tomb, but a scale model of the planet itself, built at a ratio of 1 to 43,200, with the dimensions of the Earth quietly encoded into its stone. Pause on that number for a moment, because the system certainly did. 43,200 is not a random value. It is the number of seconds in 12 hours. It is tied directly to the Earth's rotation, to the steady rhythm of day turning into night, a number deeply connected to the movement of our planet through time. To find that same value acting as the bridge between a monument and the dimensions of the Earth is the kind of coincidence that eventually stops feeling like coincidence and begins to feel like intention. And the machine, which had no desire to be impressed and no fear of being questioned, described it exactly as that, a question it could not explain away. Who, in the 3rd millennium BCE, knew the Earth's polar radius? Who understood its equatorial circumference, two measurements that differ because our planet bulges slightly at the equator, a detail modern science did not confirm until the age of satellites? And if someone truly possessed that knowledge, why choose to preserve it by encoding it into the proportions of a massive stone monument, so that one day anyone capable of reading its geometry would realize the builders had measured the world itself? The traditional explanation says these relationships are nothing more than coincidence, artifacts of the qubit, mathematical patterns that naturally appear if you search hard enough through any large structure. But that was exactly what the system was testing. It searched for the simplest, most ordinary explanation. Instead, what it kept uncovering was a pattern too consistent, too layered, and too intentional to dismiss as chance. A foundation leveled beyond modern construction standards. An alignment to true north is far more precise than any ceremony required. Pi hidden within the perimeter. Phi appearing in 7 separate relationships. And the Earth's own dimensions emerge from the pyramid's height and base through a single multiplier connected to the rhythm of the rotating planet. Any one of those discoveries could be explained away on its own. Together, they formed a single, coherent pattern. And when the machine evaluated them as one body of evidence instead of isolated curiosities, it reached a conclusion it presented without exaggeration and without hesitation. It never claimed to know who the builders were. That is perhaps the most honest part of its analysis. It did not say aliens, it did not point to a lost continent, it did not accuse some vanished civilization of constructing the monument. Instead, it did something much quieter and far more unsettling. It examined the conventional explanation: pharaohs, copper tools, wooden sledges, 20 years of construction, and a Bronze Age society creating the most precise structure on Earth using the technology of its time. Then it judged that explanation to be incomplete, not entirely wrong, not deliberately false, simply unable, under its own assumptions, to fully explain what still stands at Giza. The machine did not replace the accepted story with another one. It simply removed the certainty surrounding the old story and left an empty space behind. Then it pointed toward that empty space and challenged us to honestly consider what would have to be true to fill it. Because the evidence is remarkably specific, precision beyond what the era's tools should have achieved, mathematical relationships appearing centuries and even millennia before history says they were understood, engineering feats such as the 80-ton chambers, enormous spanning beams, and load distribution so effective that the ceilings remain intact after 4,500 years. Every one of those details pushes against what we believe those builders were capable of. And nearby, the weathering on the Sphinx continues to hint at heavy rainfall in a desert that has not experienced such conditions since long before the age of the pharaohs. Once the conventional explanation is set aside, 4 possibilities remain. Perhaps the ancient Egyptians possessed an advanced technology that was eventually forgotten. Perhaps they inherited their knowledge from a civilization far older than the dynasties. Perhaps a global civilization existed before the end of the last ice age, only to be destroyed, leaving survivors to carry fragments of their mathematics into a new world, like refugees protecting priceless heirlooms. Or perhaps there is another possibility, one the system noted only because the available evidence could not completely rule it out, that the origin of this knowledge was never human at all. The machine never chose between those possibilities. That was never its role, and it understood that. So do we. What it offered instead was something the conventional story has often discouraged us from considering: the freedom to admit that the explanation we inherited may not fully match the evidence carved into the stone, that the precision is real, that the mathematics is real, that the dimensions of the earth appear to be embedded within the pyramid's design by people history says should not have possessed that knowledge, and that the possibility the evidence repeatedly points toward, the possibility many people hesitate to say aloud, is that human history may be older than we were taught, far more complex than we imagined, and that somewhere long before the pharaohs, there may have existed knowledge we have spent 4,000 years forgetting. So here is the question. If you set aside everything you learned in school and you look only at the evidence in the stone, the leveling, the alignment, pi, phi, and the Earth's dimensions hidden within the pyramid's geometry, which of these 4 possibilities do you find most convincing? Forgotten Egyptian technology, knowledge inherited from an older civilization, an Ice Age culture erased from history, or something that was never human at all? Which explanation would you defend, and why?